Mario's foot snagged. He fell hard. The ground rushed up to meet him, and he hit it with a thud. The wind knocked out of his lungs. The forest floor was unforgiving, littered with sharp twigs and rough stones that dug into his skin. Pain shot up his leg, a searing, white-hot agony that made him gasp. He clutched at his leg, his fingers trembling as they brushed against the cold, unyielding metal of the trap. He looked back. A metal trap glinted in the dim light, its jagged teeth biting cruelly into his flesh. The sight of it sent a fresh wave of panic through him, his heart pounding in his chest like a drum. Panic surged. He was caught. His mind raced, thoughts tumbling over each other in a chaotic whirl. How had he not seen it? How had he been so careless? He struggled against the trap. It wouldn't budge. He pulled with all his might, his muscles straining, but the trap held firm, its grip unrelenting. His heart pounded in his chest. He was alone. The realization hit him like a punch to the gut. There was no one around to help him, no one to hear his cries for help. In the middle of nowhere. Mario looked around at the dense forest, the trees standing tall and silent, their branches swaying gently in the breeze. The forest seemed to stretch on forever, an endless sea of green. The trees seemed to close in on him. Fear gnawed at his insides, a cold, creeping dread that made his skin crawl. He felt small and insignificant, a tiny speck in the vast wilderness. He had to get out of here. He pulled at the trap again, ignoring the pain that ripped through his leg. He gritted his teeth, his face contorted in a grimace of determination. It wouldn't release its grip. Despair washed over him. He was trapped. The reality of his situation sank in, a heavy weight that pressed down on his chest. He was alone, injured, and at the mercy of the unforgiving wilderness. 2 days. 2 days he had been stuck. The trap bit into his leg. He hadn't slept, couldn't sleep. He tried to ignore the gnawing hunger in his stomach. His throat felt like sandpaper. Every sound in the forest sent shivers down his spine. He thought of his family, his wife, Maria, his little girl, Sofia. The thought of them gave him a sliver of strength. He wouldn't give up. Mario rummaged through his pockets. He had to find a way out. He had to see his family again. He had to escape. His fingers brushed against something hard. His phone. He pulled it out. The battery icon blinked red. Low battery. He scrolled through his contacts. Maria, Sofia. No, he had to be smart. He had to call for help. He dialed 911. The phone rang. Once, twice. Then a voice, calm and steady.
911, what's your emergency?
Hope flared in Mario's chest. Mario, help me, he croaked, his voice hoarse from days of disuse. I'm trapped. He choked back a sob. Mario, please help me. The operator's voice kept him grounded. She asked questions. Location, his name, description of his surroundings. He answered as best he could. His voice trembled. But he spoke. He clung to the hope that crackled through the phone line.
The operator assured him help was on the way. They would find him.
He clung to those words, a lifeline. Relief washed over him. He wasn't alone. Someone knew he was here. Someone was coming. But then a shadow fell over him.
Who are you talking to?
Mario froze. His blood turned to ice. He recognized that voice. He looked up. It was him. The man who had been watching him. The man who had set the trap. The man who had taken him. The man's eyes were cold and calculating. He took a menacing step closer. Fear coiled in Mario's gut. He was in trouble. Deep trouble. He ended the call with a trembling finger. He stared up at his captor, his heart hammered against his ribs. He was trapped. Again. The man crouched down. He snatched the phone from Mario's grasp. A cruel smile played on his lips.
No more calls for you.
Mario glared at him, defiance flickering in his eyes. He wouldn't let this man break him. He wouldn't, but fear gnawed at his resolve. The man disappeared into the trees, leaving Mario alone with his fear and the crushing weight of his situation. The forest was silent, except for the pounding of Mario's own heart. He had to find a way out. He had to escape before it was too late. Time blurred. The pain in his leg became a dull throb. Mario drifted in and out of consciousness, hope fading with each passing moment. A faint sound cut through the stillness. A distant wail. Sirens. His heart leaped. They were here. They had come. He tried to shout, to cry out, but his voice was a dry rasp. He could only hope they would see him, find him, save him. The sirens grew louder, closer. His heart pounded with renewed hope. Someone was out there. Someone was looking for him. Then he saw it. A flash of blue and red through the trees. The colors pierced through the dense darkness of the forest, creating an almost surreal contrast against the night. It was a beacon of hope in an otherwise bleak and terrifying situation. The lights flickered and danced, casting eerie shadows on the trees. But to him, they were the most beautiful sight he had ever seen. The police. He was going to be okay. The realization hit him like a wave, washing away the fear and anxiety that had gripped him for what felt like an eternity. The sound of the engine, the sight of the car navigating through the forest, it all signaled one thing. Help was on the way. He could almost hear his heartbeat slowing down, the adrenaline that had been coursing through his veins beginning to subside. He was going to be safe. The thought repeated in his mind, a mantra that brought him a sense of calm he hadn't felt in hours. His muscles, tense and ready to flee, began to relax. He took a deep breath, the first one that didn't feel like it was caught in his throat. The relief was almost overwhelming, bringing tears to his eyes. He watched as the police car came to a stop. 2 officers emerged. Their faces were grim, determined. They moved with purpose, their eyes scanning the area, assessing the situation. They were professionals, trained to handle emergencies, and their presence was a stark contrast to the chaos that had surrounded him moments before. Their determination was palpable, and it gave him strength. They were here to help. They saw him. The officer's eyes locked onto his, and he could see the recognition in their gaze. They knew he was the one who needed help. They approached him with a sense of urgency, but also with a calm that was reassuring. He felt a connection, a lifeline being thrown to him in his time of need. He saw the look of concern on their faces. It was genuine, a reflection of their commitment to their duty and their empathy for his plight. They weren't just doing their job. They were there because they cared. The concern in their eyes mirrored his own fear, but it also conveyed a promise. They would do everything in their power to ensure his safety. Relief flooded through Mario. He had never been so happy to see police officers in his life. The sight of their uniforms, the sound of their voices, it all brought a sense of normalcy back to his world. He felt a weight lift off his shoulders, a burden he hadn't realized was so heavy until it was gone. The fear that had gripped him was replaced by gratitude and a profound sense of relief. He was safe now. S3. Media. Police officer reassuring civilian. Close-up of police officer speaking. Man looking relieved with police. "Sir, we're here to help. Don't move." The officer's words were like a balm to his frayed nerves. He nodded, unable to speak, but his eyes conveyed his gratitude. He was safe. The nightmare was over and he was finally going to be okay. But then, a shot rang out. The air exploded with the sound. Mario flinched, fear gripping his heart once again. This wasn't over. He watched in horror as one of the officers fell to the ground. The other officer returned fire, seeking cover behind his car. The man who had trapped him. He was here, and he was armed. Mario's hope shattered into a million pieces. Gunfire echoed through the forest. Each shot was like a hammer blow to Mario's chest. He was caught in the middle of a nightmare. Section 10. Uncertainty. The officers called for backup. Their voices were tight with urgency. Mario watched the scene unfold, his heart pounding in his chest. More police cars arrived. Sirens screamed. The forest was alive with the sound of gunfire and shouting. Chaos reigned. He couldn't see what was happening. He could only hear the terrifying sounds of the battle raging around him. His fear was crippling. Then, as suddenly as it began, the gunfire stopped. An eerie silence descended upon the forest. Mario held his breath, waiting. Section 11. A desperate plan. He had to do something. He couldn't just lie here and wait. The darkness around him was suffocating, the silence deafening. Every second that passed felt like an eternity. He knew that if he didn't act now, he might never get another chance. The weight of his predicament pressed down on him, but he refused to give in to despair. He had to try to free himself. He had to escape. He looked down at the trap, its jagged edges glinting ominously in the dim light. The trap was a relic, a cruel reminder of the past. It was old, rusty, and seemed almost as desperate as he was. He examined it closely, searching for any weakness, any point of leverage. His mind raced, calculating his next move. It was old, rusty. He might be able to pry it open. He had to try, for his family, for himself. The thought of his loved ones waiting for him, not knowing his fate, fueled his determination. He couldn't let them down. He couldn't let himself down. He took a deep breath, steeling himself for the task ahead. His hands trembled slightly as he reached for the trap, but his resolve was unwavering. He started working at the trap, ignoring the pain that shot through his leg. He pulled, he twisted, he strained. Every movement sent waves of agony through his body, but he gritted his teeth and pushed on. The metal was stubborn, resisting his efforts, but he refused to give up. Sweat dripped down his face, mingling with the dirt and grime. His muscles burned, but he welcomed the pain. It meant he was still alive, still fighting. He had to get free. The metal creaked and groaned. He pushed harder, his muscles screaming in protest. The trap seemed to mock him, its rusted jaws refusing to budge. But he was relentless. He could feel the metal starting to give, ever so slightly. It was a small victory, but it was enough to keep him going. He summoned every ounce of strength he had left, channeling it into one final, desperate effort. He felt a surge of hope. He was making progress. The trap was beginning to yield, its grip loosening. He could almost taste freedom. The thought of escaping, of seeing his family again, spurred him on. He couldn't afford to fail. Not now. Not when he was so close. With a final mighty push, he felt the trap give way. Relief washed over him. But he knew the journey was far from over. He had to keep moving, had to stay vigilant. But for now, he allowed himself a moment of triumph. He had done it. He had taken the first step towards freedom. Section 12. Freedom's Call. With a final desperate heave, the trap sprang open. Mario cried out in pain and relief. He was free. He scrambled to his feet. He limped towards the sound of the police cars. He had to get to safety. He had to know what happened. He had to find help. He stumbled through the undergrowth, adrenaline fueling his every step. He could hear voices now. They were close. He was almost there. He emerged from the trees into a clearing. Police officers were everywhere, securing the area. And then he saw him. Section 13. Our uncertain future. The man who had trapped him. He was lying on the ground, unmoving, surrounded by police officers. Mario didn't know if he was alive or dead.
Sir, are you okay? We've got paramedics on the way.
Mario could only nod, speechless. They helped him to a waiting ambulance. He collapsed onto the stretcher, exhausted but alive. He was safe. He was free. But the ordeal had left its mark. As the ambulance sped away, sirens wailing, Mario closed his eyes. He was alive, but the memories of his ordeal would stay with him forever.